We have no doubt you're going to be happy with the findings, and this is going to build your capacity and enhance your skills substantially. I am going to invite my colleagues on the panel to tell you their names and where they're from. They're a very impressive crew of people. But before I do that, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Dugan Fraser. I'm the director of the Center for Learning on Evaluation and Results, based in Johannesburg in South Africa. The CLEAR Center in Johannesburg is one of 6 centers. We build evaluation capacity. We have centers in India, China, Brazil, Mexico, Johannesburg, Senegal, and we have a hub office in Washington that supports our work. If I can just ask the people at the back to put the presentation on the screen, that would be really good. Thank you, guys. And so I'm going to ask my co-facilitator, Aisha, to introduce herself, and then it's fine, it's that one. If the panel members can tell us who they are.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Aisha Jore Ali. I work at the Center for Learning on Evaluation and Results, Anglophone Africa, so I work together with Dugan. I'm very happy to be here and very happy to see you all here.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Arwah Humaid, the Monitoring and Evaluation Officer in UNDP Yemen. We hope that you find this session very fruitful.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alicia Lopez, and I am the Monitoring and Evaluation Officer of UNDP Country Office in Mexico.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mohammed Kharyouti. I am from Jordan. I am here on my capacity as the co-chair for the Regional Evaluation Network, the EvalMENA. Thank you all.
Good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Jared Ichwara. I work for the government of Kenya as the Deputy Director for Monitoring and Evaluation.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ahmed Sameh. I am an economic researcher at the Ministry of Planning, Monitoring and Administrative Reform at the Office of the Deputy Minister.
So, Yara.
Hello, everybody. My name is Yara Auda. I'm from Egypt. I work on the Monitoring and Evaluation Plan on Youth Development in the African Union, Addis Ababa. Thank you.
So while obviously with such an incredibly smart and good-looking panel, we would be able to tell you some wonderful things, that is not what's going to happen today. What is going to happen today is we're going to tell you what happened in our workshop on Sunday, and we are going to then use the opportunity to have a conversation with you. And we're looking forward to hearing what you think. We're going to make a lot of time for your feedback. We're going to encourage you to chat amongst yourselves. And this isn't going to really be a lecture. It's going to be an exercise where we talk about how we start to transform evaluation so that the real agenda of Agenda 2030, which is a transformative one, is given real meaning. And what I'm really talking about is the fact that one of the core concepts underlying Agenda 2030 is that no one should be left behind. And that's not just about the interventions that go into meeting the Sustainable Development Goals. It's also about making sure that when we do evaluations, we leave no one behind. And when we do evaluations, we follow a set of practices. We're guided by principles. There are ways in which we do evaluations that inform the way we choose our samples, the way we design our questions, the way we draw conclusions, the way we share our findings. And what we had our workshop about, which Aisha's going to tell you more about, is we discussed the different elements of evaluation practice, and we've come up with what we think are going to become known as, very famously known as, the Hurghada principles. And they're going to be the principles that we want to mainstream into evaluation practice and see this as a way of making sure that evaluation leaves no one behind. So the way we're going to run the session is Aisha's going to tell you about how we develop the principles, And then each of our participants is going to speak to one of the principals. And I'm going to be very, very strict with them. If they talk for longer than 3 minutes, I'm going to just turn off their mic. And then we're going to have a conversation. And we're going to discuss, are there principles that were important that we haven't mentioned? Are there things in the principles that are not so important? And if you agree with many of the principles, and you don't have to agree with all of them, you just have to agree with some of them, how are we going to take these forward? How are we going to start using this as a platform to be doing evaluation differently so that it really does make sure that no one gets left behind? And so I'm going to hand over to Aisha, who's going to tell you about how we develop these principles.
Okay, thank you, Dugan. Can everyone hear me? Yes, okay. So on Sunday, 28 of us sat together and worked on these principles. We had representation from various countries, from Lesotho, Yemen, Egypt, Kenya. Some of the participants are here on the panel with us. And in doing that, we used the frame that UNDP developed for leaving no one behind, which I think in Pedro's presentation this morning, it was the frame that was discussed. But really, we looked at the 5 sort of main drivers of that typically lead to people being left behind, like discrimination, shocks and fragility, governance issues, geography, and socioeconomic issues. So we discussed this at length, and then we also spoke about how is it that we will get people not to be left behind as practitioners and evaluators in this space. And so we spoke about how we examine the issues, and then how we empower people and how we enact some of the strategies that can help so that people are not left behind. So before we went any further than that, we framed the discussion around evaluation, and to do that we used the Better Evaluation Rainbow Framework, which basically maps out the evaluation process. So it's not really the standard, but we used something that at least everyone could agree with. So we went through an extensive session where we just discussed at each level of the evaluation process what are those processes and what are those steps that we need to take so that we don't leave people behind. We also used the micro-pattern guide framework, and this was when we now started working on the actual development of the principles. And as you can see, it stands for to guide, useful, inspire, developmental, and evaluable. So basically those are the features and characteristics of a good principle. What should a principle be? And this was drawn from Michael Patton's recent book. And overall, what we thought came out strongly as some of the issues that we need to consider when we are developing these principles was that really that context matters a lot, and the way these principles will be used will be varying across country to country, depending on culture and custom. We also said that principles need to be specific and allow for compliance to be assessed. So we didn't want to use broad terms and broad issues that it's common for us in the development space to use these broad overarching terms. We said the principles should be a bit more specific. And also that principles are really about values and how values are operationalized. And so if there's no consensus on what the values are, for example, if we don't agree that women are equal or should at least have access to equal services, if that's not something we agree on, then the principles will not be used to guide behavior. And then we said, the process of developing principles can serve as a mechanism for reconciliation and consensus building around several of the contentious issues in development. So without any further ado, I will pass this on back to Dugan. Yes, okay.
So the workshop, and can I ask the people in the audience who were at the workshop to just wave in a loving way? Thank you, everybody who helped us. Your contributions were greatly valued. So what we did was we sat down, as Aisha said, we went through the Better Evaluation Rainbow Framework. So we discussed everything that goes into an evaluation, what are all the tasks, And we discussed who might be left behind when you gather data, when you do analysis, when you do causal inference, when you do reporting. Who will be left behind, and what can you do to make sure they're included? And then we went through some case studies, and we looked at particular examples of evaluations, and then we used that analysis to develop these 5 core principles, and then a 6th special principle, which we're going to come to. So I'm going to ask each of the representatives to present their principles, and they're going to describe to you what the issue is that this principle responds to. So why does this principle matter? Then they're going to explain the principle, and then they're going to talk briefly about what can be done to operationalize the principle. And so we're going to start with Jared Michwara from Kenya.
Thank you, Chair, for that. Our first principle talks about the stakeholders. Normally, when we undertake our evaluations, we really need to understand who are the stakeholders, and therefore we are requesting that undertaking a stakeholder analysis will lead to us not to leave anyone behind. In most cases, when we write evaluation reports, we find that either it's skewed towards maybe the executive or the parliament or the judiciary, but then it leaves behind those who need the evaluations. And again, of course, writing a report, it has to be tailored whether it's for the public, it is for the academician, or is it for the executive to inform policy. So our first principle, which I've said, it's about mapping evaluation stakeholders thoroughly and in detail at the outset of the evaluation. So before we start thinking about conducting the evaluation, we really need to have this principle in place. So our principle reads like this: undertake detailed and thorough stakeholder mapping process at the outset of every evaluation, taking care to examine who may be left behind in order to facilitate public participation and engagement. This will lead to better evaluation results, greater credibility of findings, and more ownership by the public. So we expect after here, if this principle is accepted, that anybody who is undertaking an evaluation, then the first thing that you need to do is to look at who are the stakeholders involved in the evaluation. Of course, evaluations will be from different sides. You will have impact evaluation, outcome, output, and all that. But of course, in any evaluation that you undertake, you need to understand who are the stakeholders. Thank you very much.
That was the first principle we worked on. And the second one is going to be presented by Aisha Lopez, who is from Mexico.
Okay, so let's say that we have done an extremely beautiful map of stakeholders, that we successfully identify those publics from the outset, but then it becomes a nice table or even nicer infographic, and we put it under section 1 on our evaluation report. So then what do you think that might happen with our evaluation? So if when choosing an evaluation team, an individual or a firm, you forgot about language issues, cultural aspects, and you don't make any of those groups an intended user of the evaluation, what do you think that we are going to come up with? If when planning our data collection methodology, for example, we don't take into account geographical issues, simply maybe because we don't have any idea that there was no road to get where we wanted to go, or there are just maybe some security issues that have just arose. Let's think of maybe some of our questions, the way we are displaying it, on how our focus groups were planned. There are some community dynamics that were overlooked, and you end up with no one in the room. So what I want to say is that stuff happens if you don't allow publics to inform your thinking. So we know that not everything can be perceived from the desk, and there's not everything to be learned on books or reports, written reports. So we have not only to keep the stakeholders in mind, but go beyond and integrate them and engage them into the evaluation processes. And throughout the whole evaluation, defining what is to be evaluated, framing the evaluation, describing results, and so on. Reporting, for example, what if we never go back and share the results with those publics, or we only share the results by internet or in English? So this is going to be a big risk that our evaluation is going to be being irrelevant and not addressing really the issues of the people that were left behind. So trying to overcome that picture that I've just painted for you is that we came up with this principle number 2, that is to sustain stakeholder engagements throughout the evaluation processes. To ensure regular engagement of diverse groups throughout the evaluation processes so that they have an opportunity to have their voices heard and provide space from them to contribute in respectful and enabling environments. So I just want to emphasize on some of the ideas we were talking about in the group that we should be thinking about. So these public or diverse groups engagements shall be regular, not a once-off, just checkbox kind of consultation. We should make those in a respectful and in an enabling environment. We should convey those consultations or whatever process we came up with, that they should really give voices to the publics and allow contributions, real incidents in the evaluation processes. So if we are serious about leaving no one behind, we need to make those publics that we have detected a central aspect in our evaluations and not just an appendix or just an annex in our reports. And I will share one final idea, that to leave no one behind in evaluation is not just a matter of integrating disaggregated data into our reports, but to bring the people that could have been left behind into the evaluation by devising meaningful collaborative processes embedded in the way that we are working and we are doing evaluation. Thank you.
Thanks, Aisha. Mohammed Karayoti from Jordan is going to present our third principle.
Thank you, Dugan. So, some people are usually left behind when we do evaluations. And that is because they've been excluded for a variety of reasons. And I see this coming as a nice flow from talking about stakeholders and proper mapping of stakeholders, and now trickling down to using the right methods, the appropriate methods, so that we ensure that no one is left behind. So our third principle is to use diverse and appropriate evaluation methods. Making the use of diverse and appropriate method and inclusive methods, those should be tailored. And when the discussion that we had among the large group and the working group yesterday discussed various levels of methods. Either evaluation methods that we choose from, that menu we choose from, qualitative and quantitative methods, and also the vehicles being used to implement those methods. So evaluation methods should be tailored to the needs of evaluation participants, especially the users of the evaluation, to make sure that we include everyone and we leave no one behind. And should take into account the possibility of people being left behind, so that all stakeholders and all people are included, in order to produce accurate and evidence-based and actionable findings and recommendations, so that we can improve future programming and future design of programs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mohammed. And Ahmed Sameh from Egypt will present the next principle.
Thank you. Speaking of Principle 4 that our working group has come up with, allow me to start by saying that in order to go beyond the theory of change and what is really being addressed by the application of monitoring, we shall enhance the role of evaluation and develop more diversified methodological approaches in this instance. including data collection, data coverage, and as well as the adopted analytical tools. Policymakers and government officials, whether on the national and subnational levels, must take into account various factors that may affect the intended results and findings in order to accomplish a well-established and concrete evaluation process. With this being said, Principle 4 states the following: carefully consider the socio-economic, political, and legal context throughout the evaluation process in order to achieve validity and ensure appropriateness. All the three factors that are embedded within each and every system and really characterizes the nature and culture of every country. Therefore, it is really important to formulate such principle in order to indicate and stress on the importance of designing an evaluation process that is quite specifically tailored to fit with the given context and scenario. With such principle being put in place along the other set of principles, decision makers and evaluation implementers will be able to draw upon findings that are supported with more rigorous analyses while preserving their objectives, interests, and areas of comparative advantage. This will guarantee the pursuit of a more educated evaluation and guarantee as well an equitable recommendation. With that, we can ensure that no one has been left behind. Thank you.
Thanks, Ahmed. And Yara Uda will be presenting our next principle.
Thank you so much, Chair. So the principle says disseminate evaluation findings. Principle number 5 addresses people who are left behind in the evaluation finding process. So they are excluded from the final results, they are excluded from the decision-making process. They face lack of empowerment and their voices are not outreached to everybody, and they lack participation in the political and economic process. Also, some people who are left behind, they face problems in digital dissemination, and also they have language barriers sometimes. Therefore, Principle 5 says, disseminate comprehensive evaluation results transparently and equitably, taking care to reach people who may be left behind in order to contribute to an inclusive culture of evidence-based decision-making. Therefore, while we were discussing with the team yesterday, we reached out that we need more social inclusion and more accountability, empowerment, transparency, and equity in the information and knowledge reaching those people who are left behind. Also, we reached that 3 ways that might be used as to reach more diverse stakeholders. First, there could be multi-sectoral communication and knowledge management strategy that includes everybody, not only the public and private sectors, but also women groups in marginalized areas, youth initiatives that approach youth who are vulnerable, and we can't take findings or results from them in our evaluation process. Also, this can take place through workshops. It's not only about using different tools of data collection, but also we need to go on ground, and these workshops can be a tool to have good interviews or surveys from these people who are left behind. Also, advocacy and giving the voices from all the governorates or all the regions at the national level. Thank you so much.
Arwa Humaid is from Yemen, which is very relevant to the principle she is going to present.
So basically, after we decided upon the 5 principles, we thought of having like a special principle or an acceptance principle for fragile humanitarian and crisis countries, because in these countries, the whole community should not be left behind. So the principle says, be particularly vigilant about leaving no one behind in conflict-affected and fragile contexts and humanitarian crisis. where it says, in fragile contexts and situations of humanitarian crisis, the principles that seek to ensure evaluation leaves no one behind should be applied even more rigorously and conscientiously, since the risks are higher and the possible consequences of exclusion are potentially even more damaging. So throughout the process of evaluation, starting from the designing, planning, managing, and drafting the methodology of the evaluation, we should really focus on leaving no one behind, especially the vulnerables and marginalized people who in hardships and in these crisis countries are more likely to have a hardship in a short and a longer term. Thank you.
We've all been part of evaluations where a group of relatively privileged people come together, they talk to each other, they interview some of the people who are also relatively privileged, they answer some questions that their relatively privileged colleagues framed, they write up a report, they draw some conclusions, and they present that as evidence to inform decision making. And what we're really trying to do is to propose a set of principles that says, if we want to transform evaluation, and we want to do evaluation in a way that is genuinely different, we need a set of principles that guide us, that we can consider our practice against. And we've come up with these 6. And they're intended as a starting point. We really want to get a conversation going. We want to get some feedback from you. And I think what we would like to do first is give you an opportunity to ask the presenters any questions you may have on the principle that they've proposed. And we'll put some time into that. And then we're going to ask you whether you think there are things we've left out. Are there important elements of evaluation practice that we haven't addressed in these principles? And so we're going to ask you to make some suggestions for additional things you think need to be covered through more principles. And maybe you think some of the things are repetitive. Maybe you think principle 1 and principle 2 are very similar. Maybe for me, one of the things that we didn't really talk about was how we build people's capacity to participate and contribute in evaluations. So we want to talk about what extra things do we need to cover in these principles? That's the second part of the conversation we're going to have. And then the third part of the conversation we're going to have is, so what do we do with these principles? How do we operationalize them? How do we make them a standard part of the evaluation toolkit? How do we make sure that everybody who works as an evaluator applies these principles, if not these principles, then similar principles in the way they do their work? So I'd like to start by asking if there are any questions regarding these principles. I see ma'am, 2, 3, 4. Is there a mic? Is there either a mic, or do you feel you have a loud enough voice? Project in your most theatrical way. I'll repeat the question for those of you who couldn't hear. I think the point that was being made is that when a program hasn't been properly planned and there's not a clear theory of change and the stakeholders haven't been identified at the outset, how does the evaluator respond to that situation on the one hand? And then secondly, how do you make sure that you're striking the right level of engagement given the type of evaluation that you're planning? If it's an impact evaluation or an outcome evaluation or a process evaluation, how do you know that you're doing necessary and sufficient stakeholder engagement? Good. Number 2, ma'am.
Thank you first for your clear presentation and sharing information or the panelists. My question is in Principle 3, which is presented by Mohammed. It says use diverse and appropriate evaluation methods. We know that using different evaluation methods is very important and interesting to have better information, but as a principle, how we can implement it? What does diverse mean? It's not clear, because if we are putting it as a principle, for me, we have to be clear, and anyone who is reading this principle should have a similar understanding. So what does diverse mean, and how do you come up with this? It's clear, but as a principle, I don't get it. Thank you so much.
Well, yeah, I will try, but I mean, I will
Let's
need...
take a round, and then we'll let whoever wants to respond. Ma'am.
Hi, this is Omnia Kamal. I'm working for the Ministry of Planning in Egypt. Well, my question is, what is the connection between evaluators and programmers or people who are implementing? Because I feel that we are always working in silos. We have a very good evaluation approach, but when coming to the connection between evaluators and findings and all of this with people who are planning, who are implementing the programs and so on, I think there is a big gap. So this is the first question. And the second, actually it's a suggestion, not a question, of having something like a platform for milestones for evaluation from now until 2030, because we have 11 years to go. So I think it's a long period of time. So why don't we have a platform for milestones of evaluation of all countries, maybe every 2 years, every 3 years, whatever, to just check out what's going on, getting good, a good knowledge base of all previous evaluations. Also, the last question is the relation between evaluations and each other. Because definitely we are going to make many evaluations from now till 2030, right? So the relationship between all evaluation stages or rounds should be very clear to have a comprehensive report at the end, or even each year, or whatever the time span of each report. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. And there was a number 4, but I see there's. Please, both gentlemen, come up. You as well, sir. You first.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. My name is John Garangawan. I'm from the Republic of South Sudan. The question that I have here is the relationship between principle number 2 and principle number 4. When I see sustained stakeholder engagement, and then you talk in 4 that always consider and be sensitive to context, I see them like one is a sub of the other one. Because in principle number 2, for you to sustain the stakeholder engagement, you have to be considerate and sensitive to, to the context in that matter. So that's where I have my content. Thank you.
معلش اسمحوا لي اتكلم باللغه العربيه. صلاح كابش، وزاره النقل بجمهوريه مصر العربيه. هي مش سؤال بالظبط، لكن انا علشان نوصل للفئات المستهدفه اعتقد ان احنا محتاجين لتشخيص الوضع الراهن، ودي اهم خطوات التنميه المستدامه واول عناوينها الرئيسيه. ازاي نشخص الوضع الراهن
who don't have the interpretation devices, because there is interpretation devices. Our dear colleague here is emphasizing so that we reach all the targeted groups. We should use تفضل.
وزارة النقل جمهورية مصر العربية.
لا أنا ترجمت اللي أنت حكيته، بتقدر تكمل محل ما وقفت.
العرض اللي أنا عايز أشير ليه اللي هي إزاي نصنف أو نحلل الوضع الراهن زي المريض وزي الدكتور. لو الدكتور ما عرفش يوصل من المريض للمشاكل اللي بيعاني منها فعلا، الدواء هيبقى مش مطابق ومش هيحصل علاج.
So our colleague is emphasizing on the situation analysis and the importance of having a situation analysis, just like the patient and the doctor, because good diagnosis would lead to identifying the good medicine for any medical problem.
من أحلى الكلمات اللي سمعتها النهارده اللي هو ازاي نحلل الوضع الراهن ده طبقا للموقع الجغرافي.
طيب شكرا. So should I make the announcement? There is enough interpretation devices in the back. Is there enough? Yes. There is enough. So for non-Arabic speaking persons who would like to collect those, so that we are more time efficient and effective, rather than listening to my lousy translation. Yeah, maybe. No, he's not done. بس أنا بنحاول نديهم الديفايسز مشان. So yeah, there is enough interpretation headsets for people who would like to understand the question of our dear colleague who is speaking in Arabic. Thank you. That leaves me off the hook.
Okay. معلش أنا هبدأ تاني إن أنا بعتبر أولى الخطوات لعمليات التقييم هو إزاي نرفع الوضع الراهن أو نبني النماذج اللي على أساسها نصنف تصنيف للفئة المستهدفة، لأنهم أكتر من نوع. في اللي ممكن يكون متقبل وعنده استعداد، وفي اللي أقل، وفي اللي مش عايز أصلاً. فأعتقد إن المؤشرات التقييم لازم تاخد الأرقام التحليلية دي في الاعتبار. الكلمة التانية اللي أنا عايز أقولها إن أهم كلمة سمعتها النهاردة إن إحنا ناخد الموقع الجغرافي في الاعتبار. يعني أنا أعتقد إن الاهتمام يبقى على مستوى المحافظات أو المحليات، هي أقدر الناس على الوصول للفئات دي، بس يكون من خلال نماذج موحدة على مستوى الدولة. وفي الآخر أنا يعني عايزين أهم كلمة بأكد عليها، إن مش كل الفئات المستهدفة ممكن تستجيب للعلاج، والمؤشر لازم يطلع الجزء الضعيف ده يوضحه، إن ما تبقاش مسؤولية دولة، تبقى مسؤوليتهم هم. شكراً.
We'll take one more contribution and then we'll have a round of responses from the panel and then we'll take some more contributions from the floor. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, thank you very much, session chair and the panelists. My question is a comment on number 3. And since yesterday, we've been hearing that the paradigms of evaluations have to change. It's not business as usual. We have to do it differently to ensure no one is left behind. But the big question is, do we really have the infrastructure in place to help us change evaluations? An example, we have the guidelines that guides UNDP evaluations from the Independent Evaluation Office. And they're the same, traditional things of design, relevance, effectiveness, efficiency, sustainability, impacts. I feel these are some of the basics that needs to change so that we incorporate, leave no one behind. Secondly,
You're saying we need to incorporate these things into guidelines?
Sorry, come again?
You're saying we need to incorporate these kinds of things into official
exactly,
guidelines?
in the guidelines. Secondly, the Independent Evaluation Office requires UNDP evaluations to be independent. So that means we have to bring in external evaluators to evaluate. And the question is, do we have a community of evaluators who can be able actually to evaluate, to undertake evaluations with the lens of leave no one behind? These are critical questions we need to ask ourselves in order to change the paradigms of evaluation. Thank you.
I wanted some spicy questions and that was
Doroge,
perfect.
UNDP Kenya Country Office.
Excellent. Thank you very much, ma'am. I think what we're going to do is hold your thoughts, and I'm not shutting down the conversation at all. I just want to give my colleagues on the panel an opportunity to respond. You don't have to necessarily respond to the question that was directed to your principal, but you're very welcome to reply to whatever's been said. Who would like to go first? Mohammed?
Yeah. So thank you. I guess we had two questions regarding the third principle about the diverse and appropriate use and appropriate evaluation methods. So maybe that was one of the hot topics during the workshop. Excluding and leaving people behind was very much attributed to the use of methods. And I guess during the discussion during the workshop, we purposefully selected those words, diverse and appropriate, and we were in that debate of using evaluation or monitoring and evaluation jargon versus using what we call a layman language so that everyone can understand that. I think on the application side and how we can apply that, it is important to pilot those tools once tailored to a certain group of people. there was much of emphasis in my group who developed this principle about using the lessons learned and using what other evaluation have found in that particular end in terms of using the evaluation methods, using quantitative versus qualitative. I personally a qualitative person or a qualitative advocate, qualitative evaluation methods advocate, because I think many of those tools can include as much people as possible. We even thought of solutions about the vehicles being used to collect the data as well. Our colleague here who spoke about using those as guidelines or criteria, that would be a great achievement for the principles if we move forward to include those as the criteria. And the first thing that comes to the mind of an evaluator is the DAC criteria about efficiency, effectiveness, and the relevance, and all, and sustainability, and all that stuff. So if after what 5-10 years those are considered to be guidelines, I would brag about it. Thank you.
Anybody else on the panel? Jared.
Yes. Thank you, Chair. I think there is the first one, stakeholders analysis. Should we undertake it at the tail end of when we are doing evaluations? I think for planners, I don't know how many of us here are planners or program analysts or those who start programs. We've always emphasized that leaving no one behind starts when at the conception stage of the program. Therefore, those who have mainstreamed, countries that have mainstreamed SDGs, they have always said that all the programs or projects or policies that are being undertaken, they have to use the lens of leave no one behind. In most cases, as our colleague has pointed out, is that we find that evaluation is left to the last time. Then that is when we start discussing when we are like it's mid-term, we need to do an evaluation, or it's end term, we need to do an evaluation. What we are saying is that stakeholder analysis should start from program consumption. And of course, when we were mainstreaming SDGs across many countries, this concept was taken into consideration. Therefore, when we are moving into evaluations, we are saying that at the evaluation stage, you do not forget that stakeholders are still important as you move forward. So we do not foresee a case where countries will not think about leaving no one behind. Of course, that's the SDGs rallying call. And then when you are starting the evaluation process, then you realize that these questions about evaluations were not undertaken. So evaluation should be part and parcel of project or program design. Maybe, Chair, maybe you can allow me to maybe contribute to these DAC criteria. Of course, there are 5 principles on the DAC criteria: effectiveness, efficiency, and all that. I think the 6th one, which may be other than the principles that we have proposed, is that leave no one behind. So when that comes as part of the DAC criteria, leave no one behind, then our principles now come strongly in to support what we are calling that one, leave no one behind. I think if we can be able to change that DAC criteria to include the 6th principle, then I think we'll be home and dry. Thank you very much.
Jared, you know we're never home and dry, right? Any of my colleagues would like to add anything? Alicia?
I would like to comment on the question about the difference between principles 2 and 4. Yeah. Because at least from the point of view of principle 2, it is mostly about really engaging with the stakeholders, with those publics that we might think that are going to be left behind, just not in a matter of we are thinking about it when we are doing our designs, but actually talking to them, trying to integrate them into the evaluation processes. And this calls for a transformation in the way that we are working right now, because in a lot of ways we just do the stakeholder analysis, and then we try to do these interviews and talk to those people at some point, but then we don't actually integrate them in a more meaningful manner. So this is going to take new collaborative processes to be developed, new devices, new methodologies, new mechanisms, so that when you are, I can think of maybe having committees or reaching people from the beginning, not just at the stage of the interview, but throughout the whole process, trying to come back to them and saying, okay, do you think that these questions are going to be well taken when we are going to visit the community? Are we forgetting something? Is this the right approach? Is this report, do you think this is the better way to address people with disabilities, and so on? So this is a main difference between, this is mostly principle 2 is about participation, integration of the actual groups into the processes, while principle number 4 is about something else. So, but I agree with the comment that she said, that this is going to take that the evaluators are prepared differently. We have to take a lot of different new skills and new abilities in order to really achieve this.
There were 2 additional speakers, and in fact 3, and in fact 4. 1, 2, Andy 3, the gent here 4, and then the gentleman right at the back, you'll be number 5. Okay, and then there'll be the 6th who I haven't seen. Okay, but I'm not going to release you. I'm going to stand at the door and prevent you from leaving until we know whether you think we've left anything out. Okay, so we're going to take these questions, and then we're going to respond to them, and then I'm going to give you an opportunity to just chat where you're sitting and talk about whether you think these principles are enough or whether there are things that also need to be said. And then we need to talk a little bit about how we would take these forward. Jared has suggested that we include these in the DAC criteria as a kind of leave no one behind. I think we are a bit late to the DAC show because DAC has just done a review of those criteria. But let's hear your thoughts. And so I think, sir, right at the back, you were number 1, right? Would you mind? Yes, the gent raising his hand right now. Would you mind coming forward and... Oh, there's a mic. Okay. I suspect he's French.
Allô? Oui, c'est français. Merci, je commence effectivement par dire que maintenant, oui, l'atelier ne laisse personne pour compte, parce qu'on peut parler en français et se faire comprendre. Alors, sur ce, je vais revenir maintenant sur le thème.
Is there an English translation?
Pour moi, si on parle de
Sorry,
ne laisser
is there an
personne...
English translation? Sorry, sir, won't you hold on one sec? Can we get an English translation? To English.
Je parle en français. Ok. Ok. Je disais que je veux une précision autour de la notion de partie prenante. Est-ce qu'on veut parler des parties prenantes de l'évaluation ? Ou partie prenante d'un projet, de l'intervention qu'on évalue. Parce que peut-être c'est une question de langage. En français, pour une intervention, quand on parle de partie prenante, les bénéficiaires ne sont pas partie prenante. Alors que pour l'évaluateur, le bénéficiaire est une partie prenante parce qu'il prend part à l'évaluation. Donc c'est la première clarification. Et la deuxième, c'est sur la dissémination des résultats. Qui doit être associé à la dissémination des résultats? Merci.
And our second question. How about you, Andy? Okay.
So my first message is congratulations, and I sign on to this. But there's some enhancements I might suggest, but you may know or you may not know that what you've done is recreated quite creatively and effectively a whole literature on the knowledge of science use. There are authors of that, and it's well established, and is sort of the official approach, for example, the National Academies of Science, so that there is a research and knowledge foundation that you can use for this, but you've converted it to evaluation, which is a very difficult place to take these messages. I want to suggest a couple of things. Out of that work on science knowledge use, when we talk about stakeholders, some of us have started framing the reach of stakeholders to everyone who can affect success of the intervention and everyone who's affected by the intervention. And they must all be included. And we find that useful because it sets a frame. It's not just an open-ended stakeholder, but it's everyone who should be involved in it. And they should be involved throughout. And the most important stages are in the formation of the evaluation questions. So earlier than, right at the front of the design and the contracting, all the way through to the interpretation, and then really importantly in the communications of the evaluation. And we find that really necessary to have them involved all through that reach. And then my final point very quickly is that you've left out our non-human relatives. You're entirely focused on the natural system, or on the human system, which is where evaluation is, so it's quite understandable. But most cultures in the world, most worldviews, think of themselves as part of an integrated human and natural system. And the way that I've learned to talk about that from indigenous people is as non-human relatives, the animals and other species. And I think since we're on the verge of extinction, it might be advisable and politic to include that.
Thank you, and I think all these principles, of course, feed into other principles which are already approved by different organizations. Aisha has said already there is UNDP principles, and there are various principles of evaluation. But to me, the good of these principles that we are all struggling to ensure that evaluations can be useful, can feed into development, can be used for decision making. What I have not heard is how evaluation is embracing big data, and how are we working with other researchers, with other information development paradigm that is coming in to ensure that evaluation still remains relevant. If we are going to make evaluations very relevant to decision makers and to development, we should build in the big data. And I submit this because even decision makers are not interested, no longer interested in evaluations, which will take a long time very costly. There are still means of getting information very quickly that can be used for decision making. So in these principles, I would also add the principle of embracing big data.
Okay, thank you. First of all, maybe I was not in this room when the panelists is reflecting on principle 1 and 2. Maybe reflected on those 2 principles and I missed it. On the issue which I am going to raise, you will forgive me. Having said this, the first question which I raise is that who are usually left behind, say it in monitoring or evaluations? From my over a couple of decades monitoring and evaluation experience, and also from my country experience, the people who are left behind in the monitoring and evaluation are those marginalized people, the vulnerable people, who live at the periphery, hard to reach areas, insecurity, risk areas. Those are the people who are left behind. Whatever rigor methodology for both quantitative and qualitative we do have, in order to reach those people who are left behind, we require huge resources in terms of time and costs. Above all, for me, commitments of the evaluators and those who conduct the monitoring. In the principle, how this issue is captured to bring the evaluators, most of the principle focus on from the people side, but from the evaluators, from the people who conduct monitoring, from that aspect, how is it possible to bring their commitment, risk-taking, to reach those people who are left behind and hard to reach people? Thank you.
This lady here, yes.
Thank you very much. My name is Evelyn from UN Habitat. I want to appreciate really the work behind the principles that you've come up with. And I have 3 questions. One is to second the speaker who just spoke about who exactly are left behind. And I would like to request the consideration, probably this is taking you a little bit further than probably where we are now, but the aspect of gender, I think as much as I agree with the principles as they are, and more reinforcing to also the practices that a number of our organizations have probably also sustained in the application of the evaluation, the gender part, if it's left behind or is not considered in this case, we risk really losing a very important information as far as gender dynamics and nuances are concerned when you're doing the evaluation and how those findings are profiled. And in relation to that, linking that with principle number 5, in the dissemination of the evaluation findings or reports, it's highly recommended that the gender aspects also secure a session, and maybe aspects to do with other vulnerable groups in terms of disaggregation, in terms of how the dynamics and the nuances around that are also provided. And I know looking at gender versus income inequalities are also top information that we don't want to lose. And I would like to add women in the conflict situation, women in marginalized communities, in urban informal areas and so forth, often also for security reasons and many other factors are likely to be left behind. Second aspect is about cost effectiveness. The principle of, I don't know whether it can be a principle or a consideration, but one of the major challenge that a number of institutions, be it government or even the private sectors and financial organizations at times tend to position evaluation as a highly costly affair. Yes, it is costly affair, but looking at the principles of what you have put forward, it means if we are able to embrace evaluation and embed from the design of our programs to the actual evaluation or impact evaluation at the end of the day, we have opportunity to cut costs significantly. This should be probably a narrative that these principles should also be able to promote, so that government and other stakeholders will find interest to conduct evaluation and find ways of cutting costs. Otherwise, then it remains just an area of elite who ourselves probably calling ourselves as impact evaluators and experts. Last but not least, are aspects to do with ethical consideration. I know one of the principles you've talked about looking at probably the most appropriate methods for evaluation. But I think also the aspect of ethical consideration probably that is covered under that, or maybe needs to be further emphasized. And looking at that also, there could be programs that are not necessarily evaluable, if I could use that term, particularly when you're looking at humanitarian responses and so forth. How do you intend to apply these principles in those situations where it's an emergency response in terms of application? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for a job well done. My comment is around, since these are principles and they are meant to guide us as we come up with evaluations, I think we need to tweak them a little bit, especially, before we even go into stakeholder mapping, we need to understand for whom are we doing this evaluation, why are we doing the evaluation in the first place. So I would add the principle, or I would tweak the principles to define why we are doing the evaluation, because that would help us in terms of the rest of the principles where we are now going to map the stakeholders and so on. And my second contribution is around the purpose. It has been covered already, the issue of who exactly is left behind, because if we are moving with the theme of leaving no one behind, we need to put it in the principles so that we're able to define the people that are likely to be left behind. And this should be based, obviously, on the program document or the theory of change that we're trying to test with this evaluation, or with any particular evaluation that we're engaged in. Thank you.
Hiba Farid from Palestine. I have 3 points. Some colleagues may have mentioned it, but first of all, I think this is a very important initial step to have to speak one language among evaluators and people who are working with the SDGs. But I think you should take it further to a procedure guideline. With specific examples, with the specific definition to vulnerability, to something like crisis and the special situations. When we do the practical guideline, it's going to be globally used, and we are going to speak the same language. My second point is about definition of, we should try to find out a way to rank vulnerability, because this is a big issue. We are talking about people who may be left behind, but those categories of people who may be left behind are different between countries and different among the same country. So we might witness one layer of vulnerability, sometimes we witness 3 layers of vulnerability. And I think we must pay more attention to people suffering from more than one layer of vulnerability. So I think maybe an index, some analytical tool, to tailored analytical tool to provide definition, a monitoring tool to spot these vulnerable groups. Because, if we couldn't spot the right vulnerable groups, all the tool is not going to work efficiently. And finally, I think you mentioned that people who design the programs are splitted from people who, the evaluator. But, sometimes we can find our methods to reconciliate what the missing parts of, including people who may be subject to be left behind within our tools. And we can find tools to reconciliate this problem. And thank you.
I'm going to assume my panelists have nothing to say for themselves, right? I want to ask you, so we came up with 6 principles. We wanted to start a conversation. We've had some amazing feedback. I think given what we've heard from you, we could probably add 3 or 4 principles. I think Andy's point about our non-human relatives and natural systems would be a very important component. Maybe we need to deepen the piece around humanitarian and fragile contexts. I think one of the things we assumed is that doing a who is likely to be left behind analysis, we assumed would be obvious, but maybe we actually need to make that a principle. But let's say we were to work and we were to come up with, say, 4 more principles, and we came up with a pack of 10 principles for evaluation to make sure no one got left behind. And this is a question I'm going to ask you to discuss with the people around you. So just make a little buzz group where you sit. How would we take that pack of principles forward? Would we turn them into a guideline? Would we take them to the United Nations Evaluation Group and ask them to integrate them into their practice notes? What do you think we should do with a group of principles that we've workshopped together that we can call the Hurghada principles, and they're intended to make sure that evaluation leaves no one behind? Can I ask you to chat about that amongst yourselves for 5 minutes, and then if we could get some feedback that we could start thinking about a way of taking these principles forward? That would be great. Thank you. This is called an exercise in self-organization. You can do it.
تفضل. لا بس النظارة والمايك يكون شغال تمام. ها في اشكال ممكن لا ما فيش حتى مشكلة. لا
But the thing is, the context of the principle itself is about living our life. Yes. In every single principle, we did once you have the 5 criteria.
شكرا جزيلا. طيب يعني في المايك بيعملوا
Yes, I want to picture you.
Hey, panel. Mohammed. Jared.
A selfie from the chair.
Wow.
They are taking a selfie there.
Are we there?
Yes, we are.
We are great.
Thank you. You are great. Shukran. Oops.
Okay, we're ready. Come with your wonderful suggestions. I see a hand already in the air. Do we have a microphone? Please, can the microphone gentleman give the lady from Egypt the microphone? You're from where? Sudan. The lady from Sudan. Neighboring to Egypt. That's good enough. Okay, over to you. So, we are concerned that evaluation leaves people behind. We've come up with some principles that we think if we apply these principles, we will make sure evaluation leaves no one behind. What do we do with these principles?
Thank you very much. We said that among my group that this is very, very, very good initiative. We don't want to kill initiatives, initiative with innovations, with creativity, with everything. We need to make it alive. So we are not going to send it like directly to the independent evaluation office or for any other, kind of high practitioner group. However, we are going to test it and pilot it at our local level. We can generate or make some platform, among us as practitioners to see how it works and which part of it that really worked well, for example. By that time, we will be more concrete for recommending it in terms of what worked for us using these 10 or 9 principles, what didn't work, what really needs improve. Because we need to learn as well from the shortfall area. We need to learn as well from what didn't work. So at least when we come to the people, we come with a more concrete kind of recommendations. We recommend the 10 principles maybe also with their weaknesses. I'm sorry to say weaknesses, but maybe areas that requires improvement so that the most high level practitioner can help us better, because now we are more concrete, we are more detailed, we already have our web applications, we have a platform, we have tested, we know what kind of capacity that required, and that is what we are going to do. Thank you.
So let's make a deal. I'm going to take these 10 principles as we've described them. We're going to tweak them a bit. We're going to add a few more principles. And then I'll talk with Heather, the organizer of the conference, and we'll make them available on the conference platform. And then it's going to be up to individual practitioners to take them and use them and see, as you say, if they can pilot and apply them. And then let's get this as a self-organized thing. But it's not going to be centrally managed by somebody. Ma'am, yes.
She's going to start and I'm going to
yeah, guys, the session is nearly over, hey?
Yeah. We discuss about the something happens when I speak.
Yeah. You have this effect.
So, yeah. So we discuss about why we need this principle from the beginning. Is it too early to develop this principle, or it's too late? I don't know why we are talking about this right now. Are we inventing the new hill? That's the first question that we are asking ourselves. Are we using the learnings or lessons that has been there for the last 15 years and reflecting that here? Principles are there everywhere. We even have tools. We have a very thick guidelines on human rights, how to integrate human rights and gender in our evaluation. All of them are there. Only thing is it needs to be revised, updated, that's it. So if we start talking about adding 4 more principles, adding 10, and adding into evaluation guideline, that's not going to work for sure. The question is why we are not using that big, thick gender and human rights guideline on evaluation. What prevents us from using that? More the guidelines, more the tools, more is the problem. So we have to first understand why these things are not in place. Like my colleague said, the definition is a problem about vulnerability, about what is a stakeholder. That's the question that I asked in the first one. Are we including beneficiaries as a stakeholder? So one sentence will work. For example, we need to include beneficiaries as a stakeholder while doing a stakeholder analysis is enough. So we need to have some compliance tool to make sure that beneficiaries are included in the stakeholder analysis. So we do not need to do a whole lot of exercise adding the principle, adding in the guideline, but let's see what we already have and what we can improve. That's the point that we have.
Who would like to share the gent again. Somebody from this group? The gentleman there with the headphones on?
أنا بس بنوه هل الترتيب مناسب ولا ممكن يعاد النظر في ترتيب المبادئ؟ أعتقد مش مهم عددها كتير أو قليل، لكن المهم الإلزام بترتيب المبادئ. النقطة الثانية واللي يمكن زملاء أشاروا ليها، أنا عايز أضيف مبدأ ما بعد التقييم. متابعة التقييم، كيفية الاستفادة من التقييم. شكراً.
What we discuss around us is that many of these principles that we mentioned looks like steps and processes. These used to be there in MDG as well. And then sort of like quickly discussing and trying to finalizing these, I mean, for me, steps and processes rather than the principles, I mean, would be to rush. And to buy some time and then revisiting these so that this becomes really practical and making, I mean, adding value on STG would be wise way to go. That's what I mean we discuss among us. Another is that what about having like a more inclusive team of evaluators? You know, we look more on stakeholders, the beneficiaries, making it transparent, using appropriate tools and techniques and all, but we forget about having the evaluator, evaluation teams is more inclusive, you know, I mean independence and objectives, you know, from other lens. So that could itself add a lot of value on looking, I mean looking the matters. So these were sort of like, I mean, two major points that we discuss in our teams. Perhaps you would like to add anything further? Yeah.
Thank you. So my able group members will complement what I am going to say on their behalf. So one, we say that this has been an opportune moment to reflect probably on already existing principles. And we find that the Sustainable Development Goals, particularly the aspirations of leaving no one behind, as a moment probably has given a proper reflection of what exactly does it mean to leave no one behind. And therefore, we support the principle as they are, but we have a few considerations that we would like to add. One is on gender. We say as long as, gender aspects are not captured there, both men and women, particularly women in this case, are likely to fall off the crack. So there's a bit of generalization of the application, and that maybe gender would something that you may want to consider. Secondly, the aspects of indigenous people and also vulnerable groups. How are you going to bring that out is something that probably you may want to consider. In terms of application of what next with these principles, we appreciate the level of effort and the minds that have gone into developing these initial principles. We say that in terms of representation, particularly in this conference of the institutions of higher stature when it comes to evaluations, are also included in this conference. So if we can also look at how best probably this either could be part of the declaration or the recommendation, and actually can be looked at from a point of developing principles that may be based on the comment that was shared earlier to explore what exactly is already available and how this could complement available resources for purposes of not duplicating effort and maybe adding principles on top of others, but streamlining them. And for those that already exist, how best they can be reviewed probably to also take advantage of the new nuances and ideas you have. Thank you.
We're a little short on time. I'm going to start wrapping up.
One other point about how we do this, and there are certain things like VOPEs and National Evaluation Associations, but we talked about fundamentally recognizing that this would be a shift in power in evaluation, and that power is not usually given away, so it's going to be really more effectively, it has to have a bottom-up sort of movement to start doing this.
Do you insist on speaking, ma'am? No, go for it. I'm just teasing. Take a quick moment. Yeah, I think what I'm really hearing what that group was saying, and also you. I mean, maybe we don't need a whole new package of principles. Maybe we need to be thinking about how to integrate these into existing guidelines. Maybe it's a conversation we need to have with the conveners of this conference. We need to talk about how we can integrate this thinking into whatever comes out of the conference declaration. But I'm going to give my panel colleagues a last word, and then I'm going to wrap up. What are your thoughts, Aisha?
Okay. So for me, this has been very enlightening, starting from Sunday when we started this discussion till now. I feel like we have focused a lot on the who will be, who is the public, who is that person who's usually left behind. And personally, I feel like that is obvious. It's going to be reflexive. It's going to be based on the program that you're working on. But my emphasis, I think, here should be on how are we evaluating the programs? How are we running the programs? That is the question I think that we need to ask, and the lens that we should use as practitioners when we're doing whatever it is we're doing, whether it's evaluators or we're program people, is to ask ourselves, how are we running whatever we're running to make sure that nobody is left behind? So I think that's what we need to take home and try and reflect on.
Okay, thank you everybody for all the questions. It's a very great session. Let me say that we don't want anyone to be left behind, and people, if they receive the right information in the right time, they will understand what they need, and they will help even the evaluators and people who are working on projects on having what they want and their demands in the society. And I believe that the platform, there is somebody who was talking about platform, I believe that it could be the youth role here, because we need to use or invest in the youth in every district in such platforms to reflect the needs and demands of where they belong to. Also, I believe that who is responsible is just like Aisha said, but it's who, like, I believe that through dissemination, this could be what's coming after. Dissemination might be periodic, might be monthly, might be yearly, might be in a form of report, might be online, might be by a person offline. So dissemination actually to the findings would reflect if you're on the right track or not. It's, are you directing it to the right audience? Are you directing it to the right public? So if you periodically, whether internally in your team or externally to the public, if you find out feedbacks that you use them, then this is a kind of periodic evaluation so that you can keep up with the process and shift according to the needs and demands of what you have of final results. I have a lot to say, but I can give the chance to my colleagues to continue. Thank you so much.
Thank you, colleagues, for the questions. So as a takeaway from session, I can say, and as Dugan said, that we can have a more detailed principle on humanitarian and crisis in fragile countries, because if you're implementing a program or a project, you would really like to know what is the impact and the results achieved to save and to serve that community. So I have reviewed some evaluations where really communities are left behind, not only beneficiaries or vulnerable groups or marginalized groups. So we will work together on that. Thank you so much.
So I would really like to thank you, Dugan and Aisha, for a wonderful experience. When coming up to the room for a workshop, I was never expecting to end up on this really vibrant conversation and having the opportunity to address the audience and to hear their ideas. And my last reflection, well, might be the first for a group of reflections on what have we just begun here, is that what does it mean the principal idea that you told us about during the workshop. That is something that guides our behavior on a daily basis. So coming from UNDP, where we have lots and lots of guidelines, procedures, and all, the thing that you were saying there, that what is preventing us from actually implementing those is that we might have not been yet taken into really a principle. And when we go back to our offices and we are faced with these incredible amounts of work that we have to do, and someone asks us to really perform an evaluation with these lenses, we need to remember ourselves what does this acting by a principle really means, that we don't just okay, we answer the question and move on. So I'm going to keep on thinking on that and hopefully keep adding to this that we have started today.
So thank you, Chair. Thank you, Aisha. I'm not going to speak about any technical terms, but I think we started on Sunday with 25-something people, and today we have triple that number. And when I say triple the number, I mean people on board of advocating for principles, regardless what are those principles are. I see this going viral in a couple of years. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, colleagues, for the support that you have given to the principles that we started. I think it's the right time. It's not too late to have them. I think our colleague is asking, are we going to stop using them at this moment? I think as we go back home, we need to start thinking about them as we implement evaluations. One of the things that maybe Chair needs to mention is that we need to come up, I mean, the principle that you are asking about capacity building or professionalization of evaluators. Can we have those evaluators who can pick up in terms of these principles? I think CLEAR AA and the World the World Bank are coming together to start having a professional of evaluators, so that like any other profession, we are able to come and use the principles that we have talked about. And of course, the last one we really need to think about is how do we engage the dark group of the World Bank, I think, again, still, and start thinking about how do these principles also enter into the criteria. Because without of course, the other question we're asking is compliance. How do we really come up with a compliance mechanism? I think as we move forward, these are some of the questions we really need to address. For me, I'm so grateful to be part of this panel, and of course, the best that we have done for our world. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. I don't think my colleagues have left so much to say, but I think we all agree on what we've been discussing. We all agree that we need capacity building. We all agree that we need education. We all agree that we need a lot of things to make sure that no one is left behind. But I think we've worked on a very good base. We've set very concrete and comprehensive principles. And I think you guys have also added on to our work. So I have to thank you guys for your participation. From my part, I think if I could speak on behalf of my ministry and my government, I need to make sure and stress on the fact that we as a government have a lot of emphasis on evaluation in our work, especially in the Ministry of Planning. We do have an integrated system for monitoring and evaluation that is really based on social participation and analytical and developed analytical tools. So yeah, I think this is it, and thank you so much for everyone, and have a good day.
Thank you very much, everybody. Please give yourselves a big round of applause. You were a great Team, we really enjoyed the conversation. I hope you have a good rest of the conference, and thank you so much for attending. Thanks very much, everybody. You were a dream team, guys.